All right. Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Clark in the Center for Weight Loss Success. Today on Losing Weight USA, we're going to talk a little bit about some what I call clinical pearls of utilizing a low-carb diet. Typically, we talk about low-carb diets in our weight loss plans because most of my patients are carbohydrate sensitive. Many of them are insulin resistant. Some of them are type 2 diabetics, which is just a stepping stone along those different diagnoses. So it's pertinent for many of our patients, that are actually probably almost all of our patients that I see here at the office. All right, so welcome to Losing Weight USA, real-time answers to your weight loss questions, some of the latest updates and research, as well as a little bit of expert advice. Gives you direct access not only to me, but you should be receiving the health tips and recipes via the membership portal. And yes, get into the membership portal. Each webinar is going to last about 30 minutes or so. If you have questions, type them into the chat box as we go along. We'll get to them at the end. If you think of things once we're all done, just give us the L here at the Center for Weight Loss Success. The email is success@cfwls.com. Phone number 757-873-1880. All right, very good. So again, we're talking about some what I call clinical pearls of utilizing low-carb diet for weight loss. Let's get the slides up. All right, so this discussion really is based on a chapter in a book referred to as The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living. It's written by two research scientists, physicians, by Dr. Jeff Volek, as well as Dr. Stephen Phinney. They've been doing weight loss research, low carb research for years and years. Dr. Phinney probably almost 40 years. Jeff Volek probably a good 25 plus years. Okay, this book itself is easily available on Amazon or wherever you buy books. Has a bunch of basic science in it, but it really is written more for the layman, so it's not that hard to understand. Another really important resource, just as I digress here for a minute, they've written another book similar to this, but they refer to it as The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. And this really goes into looking at how athletic performance actually improves on utilizing a low-carb diet. Right? Anyway, I won't get into that part of the whole thing here. So the Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living, good resource for people that are interested in kind of the science behind all, kind of why is this low carb work so well. All right, so we're going to dive into some clinical pearls then. And the first clinical pearl, it doesn't, just first read doesn't really make sense. And the first one is honor the Schwatka imperative. What does that mean? Okay. Frederick Schwatka, that's where the Schwatka imperative comes from. Frederick Schwatka was an Arctic explorer who in 1880, so, what, 140 some years ago, okay, gave a very clear description of keto adaptation. It was basically the Arctic explorers, they ended up having to live on reindeer meat. Basically, they didn't have vegetables with them. They didn't have a bunch of carbohydrate with them. They basically lived on what the natives, the Inuit Indians up there, lived on. And it was basically reindeer meat during the winter. Okay? And what he noticed was that there was a period of time where the explorers themselves were all just extremely fatigued. Okay? But then they found, hey, their energy level just kicked in and really went up a notch and was much better than it ever was. So their energy level, after they went through this kind of adaptation phase, it took just tremendous, like, hey, energy level is really good. And this adaptive phase typically takes about 2 to 4 weeks. And during this adaptive phase, yep, you often will feel worn out. I'm fatigued. I feel like you have the flu, sometimes not thinking clearly. And this same thing tends to appear if you go off off a very low carb diet for a period of time and then go back onto it. And so it is something you do have to make an adaptation to, and you have to realize this is going to happen. But once you get through that adaptation process, you're going to feel and function just about your best, especially if that carbohydrate restriction is consistently maintained and you don't kind of flip back and forth between restriction and non-restriction. If you do that, typically you're kind of starting over. You have to go through the adaptation process again. But realize there is an adaptation process, and it is very, very real. Right. Number two, clinical pearl number two. It only appears to be high protein. You know, we talk about low carbohydrate. Sometimes people will call it, gee, it's low carbohydrate, high protein diet. And that's really not true. It only appears to be high protein. Now, initially during weight loss, there is a higher percentage in your diet. And part of that is that, hey, if we cut back on calories, you still have to get in the right amount of protein. So what you need to make sure is that, gee, when I cut way back on calories in this diet plan, and I cut way back on carbohydrate in this diet plan, is that you need to not cut back on your protein intake. So if we take in the same amount of protein of what we previously needed, typically it's going to appear to be high protein. Now, the whole concept of what we talk about when we talk about getting your protein in, the whole concept is to preserve lean body mass. Okay? It's your lean body mass that really drives your overall metabolism, and we want to keep your overall metabolism as high as possible. And typically when we cut way back on calories, we do need to bump up protein a little bit. But in the long run, basically, this is kind of what we refer to as adequate protein, not high protein. High protein diets themselves typically are what sometimes very high performing athletes utilize. So if they're really performing at a high level, they'll often will take a significant amount of protein, much more than the rest of us need. So remember, it's adequate protein, not high protein. It only appears to be somewhat higher protein. All right, so just keep that in mind. All right, the third clinical pearl is if you can't lose your fear of fat, then it's really, really hard and basically impossible to do low carb maintenance. Okay? Because our calories have to come from somewhere, is the bottom line. So if we cut way back on calories, we cut way back on the carbohydrate, then we have to not fear fat. It's really, really difficult. And basically, I'm not going to say impossible, but it's basically very, very difficult to do both low carb and low fat. I mean, typically the palatability of food has to come from somewhere. The flavor, the satisfaction of food has to come from somewhere. And yes, it comes from some protein, but then fat is also the other option. You can't fear fat. So if you're carbohydrate sensitive, this doesn't really go away because you lost weight. So say you kind of, okay, I've lost my weight, I'm getting down towards maintenance, I'm going to start adding some calories back. You're going to always need to add, you're always going to need to be careful with your carbohydrate intake. We can't cure that carbohydrate sensitivity. Now, having said that, with these newer injectable medications, we can actually improve some of that carbohydrate sensitivity, but it's not really going away. It's not like, oh, you won't be sensitive anymore. Yes, you will. Okay, that's just your physiology. So the energy that we take in, the calories that we take in, have to come from somewhere. And it's either coming from protein, carbohydrates, or fat. I guess you could throw alcohol into that, but hopefully that's not where you're getting your calories from. Alcohol doesn't help a weight loss plan. But anyway, so protein, carbohydrates, or fat. So if we're on a low carbohydrate diet and we're not going way high protein, you can't fear or should not fear utilizing some fat. Okay. Simply put, there's basically no option for weight maintenance that is simultaneously really low carbohydrate and it's also really low in fat. It's just there isn't a way to do that. So you need to lose that fear of fat. Okay? But leading into clinical pearl number 4, okay, is you do need to be picky about some of those fats. Not all fats are the same. And typically we talk about being, many people will talk about you have to be really careful of saturated fats. Well, really what you need to be careful of is probably those polyunsaturated fats, because these are the ones that can change to trans fats. These are the ones that often come from some of the less healthy sources. Okay? So you need to be selective about fats that you eat for energy. And you do want to give high priority to those monounsaturated fats, as well as utilize some of the saturated fats. Saturated fats like coconut oil, things along those lines. Don't fear butter so much either. But you do, again, want to avoid a lot of polyunsaturated fats. So select olive oil, safflower oil, canola oil, as I mentioned, coconut oil, butter itself. So butter and full fat cheese are basically okay. Now that doesn't mean you go crazy on them, but again, you need to lose that fear of fat. What you want to be most careful of is those polyunsaturated fats such as soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, cottonseed oils. Now you also notice that most of these are actually come from a carbohydrate source. Soybeans, corn, that thing. The 5th clinical pearl is what I call the salt paradox. Okay? Typically, we've been told throughout our lives is kind of be careful with salt intake. But okay, when you adapt to a low-carb diet, the kidneys actually fundamentally change how they handle sodium. Okay? And on a low-carb diet, the kidneys are no longer going to retain sodium, okay? But rather they'll secrete more sodium in the urine. And if they secrete more sodium in the urine, then you do need to make sure that you're getting enough salt in. We can't live without salt. So since you can't survive without salt, it's generally fine on a low-carb diet is to add 2 to 3 grams of sodium into your daily intake, which is generally a little higher than what we often tell people that, you got to be really careful with your salt. Now, there are certain individuals that do have to be very careful with salt intake due to how it influences their blood pressure. So if you're one of those, then yeah, you still got to be careful there, but still not as careful. If you're on a low carbohydrate diet, a keto type diet, then subsequently, then you don't have to be so careful about salt intake. All right. Okay. So then, pearl number 6. Okay. Don't trust the bathroom scale with your mental health. And this kind of goes along with the previous one, since we're no longer retaining sodium. Typically, you don't get those huge water fluctuations. But if you think about it, most of our body is made up of water. Generally, a good 2/3 of our body is water. Okay? And then what's amazing, though, is that our bodies actually regulate this very well. They regulate this within probably about a 2-liter window. But a 2-liter window actually is about 4 pounds. This fluctuates up and down, good 4 pounds of water weight. And that's all the time. And that's even on a very low carb diet. Now, when you first transition to a low carb diet, people go, hey, I'm losing weight really fast. It's because you're no longer retaining sodium, therefore you're no longer retaining water, and you get rid of a lot of extra water that your body was hanging on to. So yes, you lose weight much faster then. But in the long run, if your body still has to regulate the water intake, and it does it remarkably well, but there will be fluctuations of a few liters, which is a few pounds. Again, 4 or 5 pounds, really easy. And for people that are carbohydrate sensitive, if they have a, quote, bad weekend, where, I ate a bunch of things that they can easily gain 5, 6 pounds over a bad weekend. It typically is water weight, because we didn't eat an extra 5 or 6 pounds worth of food. Okay? But okay, doesn't mean that the numbers on the scale don't change. Yes, they do. And often, gee, if we go back on that low carb diet, it'll still take a couple of weeks to get that off. So people that are carbohydrate sensitive, bad weekend can make it much harder to lose weight because it's easy to gain 5 pounds over the weekend. It's hard to lose that 5 pounds again. It may take a few weeks for that to happen. Bottom line to this is that fluid shifts are going to occur. So don't let that, the changes in the fluid shifts, and then you're stepping on the scale, seeing that, don't let it mess with your mental health. Okay, so what you really want to do when you're weighing yourself, and I do encourage people to weigh yourself routinely. I encourage people to weigh themselves daily. Okay, watch the trends, not the absolute numbers. Okay, what you may want to do if you weigh yourself daily and just average your last 7 week of weights, that's probably a close to your accurate weight. So weigh yourself daily. Watch what happens. And the reason to weigh yourself daily is if you're really sensitive to carbohydrates, which most of my patients are, then you're going to find that it's really easy for weight to kind of jump way up. Again, a bad weekend, you jump weight up. It's water retention, and just realize that's going to occur. But it's also that if you can weigh yourself daily, you can look back on your previous 24 to 48 hours and go, what was it that I ate that influenced my number today? And once you start figuring that out, it's like you know which foods tend to affect you the most. All right, but it won't happen if you're only weighing yourself once every week or once every couple of weeks or once a month, anything like that. Looking back on a week's worth of time is like you'll never figure out what it was that actually was causing this fluid shifts and the weight change on the scale. All right, pearl number 7, right? Exercise. Exercise is really a wellness tool. It's not a weight loss tool. Yes, we encourage everyone should be exercising, and especially during a weight loss plan, because again, you want to preserve that lean body mass. Exercise typically does not make you lose weight faster. I don't know how many times I've heard someone come in and tell me, gee, I'd be losing weight more if I were only exercising. And there's might be a hair of truth to that, but basically not a whole lot. Weight loss is due to dietary intake. Okay? Lean body mass is preserved by exercise and getting your protein in. So exercise is a health thing. It's not necessarily a weight loss tool, but it does help you preserve your lean body mass. If you preserve your lean body mass, you're going to keep your metabolism high as possible, and subsequently then be able to lose more weight, but also keep that weight off a lot easier. Okay? Makes weight maintenance a lot easier. Exercise, one of the best things, and talk about exercise, the best exercise is really weight training, okay, for preserving that lean body mass. So don't be afraid to lift weights. Pearl number 8, okay, follows with the exercise part. A sore muscle is a swollen muscle. So it's like, gee, you dive back into exercise and boy, I'm really sore. And my weight jumped up. Yes. Exercising an unfit muscle causes some soreness. Soreness basically is a sign of water retention. But in the long run, that soreness is typically followed by improved muscle function. And that's why, gee, that little bit of soreness after working out, the next day after a workout, yeah, you should be a little bit sore. Now, you shouldn't be, I can't move sore. That means you've overdone it, and that may actually lead to injuries, though. But a little bit of soreness is actually not a bad thing. Just realize that soreness basically means there's a little swelling in the muscle. The swelling in the muscle is going to be water retention. And water retention your weight will seem like it jumps up. But a little bit of muscle soreness is actually a good thing. The inflammation goes away. And when the inflammation goes away, the swelling goes away, the fluid goes away, the weight comes back down. So when the soreness is gone, the swelling is also gone. And again, it's kind of one of those, don't let the scale drive you crazy. Doesn't mean you shouldn't weigh yourself, but just realize there are other things that will influence our weight, from water retention to a bunch of other things there. How much you're exercising, soreness after exercise. Yes, it does influence our weight, but you will figure those things out if you're weighing yourself routinely. And continued along that muscle exercise type of thought process, pearl number 9 is that muscle cramps are basically, which are very common, are basically an unnatural complication of a highly refined diet. The more whole, clean, green we can eat, avoiding over-processed foods, typically will help prevent muscle cramping. Now, muscle cramping also tends to occur with dehydration, magnesium deficiency, and actually one of the most common things for muscle cramp for people that are prone to muscle cramps is actually magnesium deficient. It doesn't show up in your blood work, meaning that, gee, if you get your magnesium checked by your primary care physician, it usually is going to be in the normal range. But it isn't the bloodstream that I'm worried about having enough or not enough magnesium in it. It's the muscles themselves. They need the magnesium. So showing up in your blood work doesn't really tell you that until the magnesium levels are so low that it's really hard to replenish those things. So the treatment there, okay, plenty of hydration, but also potentially adding a magnesium supplement. The only group of individuals who probably should be very careful with magnesium supplements are people that have bad kidneys. Because literally, if your kidneys don't function well, then you won't handle magnesium quite as well. For most of us, though, if our kidneys are functioning fine, you can add plenty of magnesium. And if anything, it's just going to help keep your bowels working better, because magnesium is also the working ingredient in milk of magnesia. So subsequently, yeah, it helps keep bowels a little more regular as well. So sometimes, just for those people prone to constipation, sometimes just adding a magnesium supplement is the answer there, and it'll help fix all those things, as well as stay hydrated. All right, and our last little pearl for today is that in time, your habits will change. Okay, and it definitely sounds, when you're first starting out on a low carbohydrate diet, it's very overwhelming. Okay, so when you first contemplate this, thinking about all the foods I'm going to have to change, okay, removing most of these high carbohydrate foods, it often seems overwhelming. But basically, you can still, that doesn't mean you can't eat any carbohydrate, because typically the salad greens, the colorful vegetables and salad stuff, they are carbohydrates. They just happen to be really low in usable carbohydrates. Plenty of fiber, which is good for you, plus plenty of great nutrition that's in those foods, salads, colorful vegetable things, as well as kind of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, all these things. So we really ought to be mainly concentrating, even though we're on a low carb diet, concentrating on eating those vegetable salad things with good protein sources. Kind of an oversimplification, but it works really well. And it's amazing how in life, okay, how many of our habits, social interactions around our family, our friends, or coworkers, is they tend to revolve around carbohydrate foods. But if you can become keto adapted, as I mentioned in that first slide, and you really get comfortable with that low carbohydrate diet, the positive changes that occur in your life actually become its own positive reinforcement. And this in itself becomes very empowering. All right, very good. That kind of winds it down there. So in summary then, initially, in transition to a low carbohydrate diet is difficult. Isn't necessarily for everyone, but literally from 2/3 of the population out there, it can be very helpful. So, but for anyone who truly is carbohydrate sensitive, which again, 2/3 of the population is, the overall health benefits are a goal worth pursuing. And eventually it becomes easier, like anything we practice doing. It becomes easier, not so much difficult. It just kind of feels right. This is how I live. All right. Questions. Don't see any questions sitting out there at the moment. But again, if you think of questions, obviously don't hesitate to pick up the phone, walk in the door, walk in the door, get your body count checked, send an email, send a text, whatever. All right, so yes, stop by the Center for Weight Loss Success, get your body count checked, log into the membership portal. I help run this all the time. You should be receiving the weekly weight loss tips as well as the weekly recipes. Tune in each Tuesday, 12:15 for the next webinar. Watch your email for the invite and link. And remember, it's your life. Make it a healthy one. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.